Just when you thought it was safe to get back into the water. Just when you thought it was safe to stick your head up out of your hovel into the cold, brisk winter air, what happens? The ruling from the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court comes down on the Attorney General versus Milton case involving the MBTA Zoning Act, Section 3A of Chapter 40A. And people are still trying to understand it and still trying to evaluate it. Nobody seems to have a clear answer as to exactly how this applies to all the pending cases and how this applies to the impending doom and gloom that we've been warned about by our leaders and officials. Hi, I'm Joe Pasevich. It is January 8th, and again, we are past winter solstice. As of 2 days ago, the sunsets are later in the day. The sunrises are earlier in the day. And back on December 21st and 20th, the sunsets were later in the day. So now the sunrises and the sunsets are going this way. The days are getting longer. You got 9 hours of sunlight. Things are looking up. You can now pull out your seed catalogs and start laying out your garden. As you know, on Control Room, we promote gardening. We promote what we call override gardens because that's also what's coming. You think MBTA zoning and all the controversy around that was just enough to keep you occupied? Well, we also have a vote coming up. You have to go to the polls if you're so inclined, and you should. On January 25th, there is going to be a ballot question for you to vote on, and that is whether or not to approve the borrowing of over $270 million for the construction of a new vocational technical high school. I think they're going to start calling it just South Shore Technical High. I think they're going to take the vocational out. That actually sounds like something like at a convent or something. But anyway, and so that is going to be a vote on Saturday the 25th. And the voting hours are kind of limited. It's something like 10 to 4, like in the middle of the day. And you are going to vote whether or not we should agree to pay for a new vocational technical high school. They don't want to renovate or expand the existing school. From what I've seen and what I've heard is really a rock solid building. There's a lot of school buildings that are rock solid. If you grew up in Boston and went to schools like the Mathis School or English or the Grover Cleveland or something, those schools were built to last hundreds of years. And some of them around here, like Abington High School, what a beautiful brick and masonry building that was, and they knocked it down. It was beautiful. It was a work of art. And in places like the city of Lowell, their old high school, which is downtown, is also a classic, granite block, brick mortar structure. And what are they doing? They're gutting it. They built an addition, and they're gutting the old building and remodeling it because it is a beautiful building. It's architecturally very pleasing to look at. But in our case, in Marshfield, that was a little bit of a monstrosity that we got rid of, okay? But the new building was only given like a lifespan of 40 years. Now, the Voc Tech School, they want to tear that down, build a new one, pass the cost on to the member communities. $276 million, as you see from the graphic, is the projected cost. About 111 is going to be paid by the state, supposedly. Okay, that's not in concrete. And the rest is 140 million plus, which gets distributed among the 9 different towns that are in the vocational technical school district, including Marshfield. Marshfield looks like it's going to be picking up somewhere around 16 or 19, 16% maybe of the cost. And the costs are going to be spread out among the different towns. Marshfield, I believe, is the largest town, or is the largest town in the vocational district. So they are happy. The other towns that are smaller are happy to see Marshfield's generous taxpayers join in on the party, because we're going to be picking up the largest percentage. Now, what is going to be the actual cost to the taxpayers? It's really not known. The graphic will give you some idea, but the town has not been really forthcoming in exacting in terms of telling us what it's going to cost us. On top of that, we are going to be given, there are increasing numbers of Marshfield children and their parents who are now applying to get their children into the vocational school, vocational technical school. And right now, the technical school district is holding 40 seats available for each year. So at maximum, we could have 160 students, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, 40 in each group, from Marshfield, 160 students. And what will be the assessment that we'll have to pay to have our children go there? Well, when you add that to the debt payments that we're going to have to make for the new school, you're talking over $3 million a year. And already, if you had paid attention to Mr. Maresco give his town administrator's report at the last select board meeting, what did he mention? Meetings about overrides. Uh-oh, here we go again. Of course, it's a cup of coffee a day, or maybe a deluxe large grande latte a week or something like that. So they're going to try to minimize the impacts, and they're going to try to sell it to you that way. So again, January 25th, go to Marshfield High School to vote. It's like 10 to 4, 10 to 2. Don't take my word for it. Assume 10 to 2, okay? So maybe there's a little more time on the front and the back end of that voting period. And cast your vote. Yes or no, should we take on that portion of the debt for the new vocational technical high school? In the absence of hearing exacting data, what can we say? You know, I tend to vote no on things when people don't give me the information I think I should have, all right? Or if it hasn't been explained properly. Now, back to the issue of the MBTA zoning, and we have a lot to cover tonight. I'm going to try to get through it. We have lots of clips and stuff like that. MBTA zoning, the decision came down early this morning, and it is in part, here's the conclusion part of it. For the foregoing reasons, we declare that the Act creates an affirmative duty. An affirmative duty. One is a mandate called an affirmative duty. Now you talk about, you know, innocuous sounding, fuzzy sounding terms. Now this tells you that this decision is politically motivated. Right off the bat. That is a terminology, and you know Maury Healy had no problems. I had no problems with accepting the idea that the Massachusetts Supreme Court was going to vote to uphold the constitutionality of this edict. This is Chapter 40A, Section 3A. If you've got a computer, you can Google it and you can read it. I've got a copy in front of me here. For the foregoing reasons, we declare that the Act creates an affirmative duty. How come they won't call it a mandate? What, are they afraid of using that word? You bet your bippy they are. For each MBTA community to have a zoning bylaw that allows for at least one district of reasonable size. What is reasonable? Where multifamily housing is permitted. What is multifamily? As of right, as dictated by chapter, well then, now they're getting more accurate with the use of their nomenclature. General Law Chapter 48, Section 3A, and that the Act's delegation of authority to HLC, that's the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities. I have a lot to say about them. I won't have time to get into it now, but that has been created and has got broad reach to affect how you are going to live for the rest of your life and how your children will live. Okay, we're talking Agenda 30, United Nations, Green New Deal. Everything is wrapped under the umbrella of the HLC now. So this Chapter 48.3a, delegates authority to the Housing and Livable Communities people to promulgate guidelines, does not violate Article 30 of the Massachusetts Declaration of Rights. That's the Constitution they're referring to. We further declare that the Attorney General has the power to bring suit for declaratory and injunctive relief to enforce 3A. Now, do they describe what that relief is? What the relief could be? No, they don't. In other words, what powers does the Attorney General to have? What can she do to you to make you adopt this 3A and its corresponding guidelines? However, because Housing and Livable Communities' current guidelines were not promulgated in accordance with the Administrative Procedures Act, we declare them ineffective and as such presently unenforceable. The case is remanded to the county court where a single justice is directed to enter a declaratory judgment consistent with this opinion. The remainder of these claims are dismissed. And already we're seeing spin here, okay? We're going to try to break this down. But some of the spin we're seeing And there's mixed opinions on what this actually means, because as you see in the language, they're saying the guidelines were not promulgated properly. When you pass a law, the law usually authorizes and empowers the state's regulatory agencies to adopt regulations. But adopting regulations isn't just guidelines, like here are our suggestions. All right, we're going to just write up whatever you want, however you think it should be done. No. Regulations, the statute happens in the legislature. The guidelines are put together by a regulatory agency, in this case designated to be the Housing and Livable Communities, the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities. They didn't have review of the impacts. Apparently, if you look at the court decision, I've got it right here. As part of the process, they did not look at impacts to the communities. They did not talk to the residents and the business communities and get financial and other impact statements put together before promulgating their regulations. They apparently had no public hearings on these so-called guidelines, which are supposed to be called regulations, by the way. So therefore, the court is saying you didn't follow that procedure, then it's ineffective. So the guidelines included deadlines. They included density requirements, like minimum 15 or 16 units per acre, a lot of other particulars, including when you had to comply, when you had to file your plans, when you had to vote on this. So therefore, if none of those particulars that were being used to force this upon us are valid, as the court says they're ineffective, then nobody can be under the gun, nobody can be sued, nobody can be required to do anything about this. Now, in response, the governor, being the tyrant that she is, and her handlers, the tyrants that they are, again, this is part of the crew, all right? Her handlers are part of the crew, like I always say. They want to live off your sweat. They want you to build bricks without straw. If you remember the scene from the Ten Commandments movie with Charlton Heston, when the slaves are being told to work harder and produce more bricks for the Pharaoh. But this is part of the crew that wants you to pay for them to sit on beaches in the Caribbean with rum drinks surrounded by teenage prostitutes. Now, I'm not saying that they actually do that. They get on the plane, they get on the Lolita Express, and they go to an island and they order Myers rum, and they particularly. But I want you to use the imagery, because these are people that don't have your values and care only about their own enrichment. All right, that's the way I perceive these people, and you probably should start thinking that way yourself. So anyway, also we do take calls. You can call the control room Gold Line if you're part of the Gold Line Club. So I'll be taking calls tonight. So anyway, so what the governor is planning on doing now, and they've already issued a press statement, is that they are going to take the so-called guidelines that were put together, and I showed them to you on my last show. I don't think I brought them with me tonight. It's a very thin packet of paper that they have, guidelines that include these deadlines and all the other stuff I just described. She's going to resubmit those basically and put a label on them, or a cover letter saying these are emergency regulations. So under state law, you can have a law passed and you can put it into effect. Whenever you pass a law, there's always a grace period. There's a period of time before it goes into effect. The same thing with regulations. So she's going to declare that these regulations or guidelines, there's an emergency that currently exists, and for the good and to save lives and to save people, and because it's such a dire emergency, we want those regulations to go into effect immediately. So within 2 days, the governor has promised to do this. But typically, whenever you do an emergency act like that, you have to justify it. Now, the Attorney General, Housing and Livable Communities, the governor, they all say, oh, don't worry about this Section 3A requirement for affordable, not affordable, but family housing. Don't worry about it. Yeah, caller, can you hold on a minute? hold on, caller. Let me get through this sentence. We got a caller coming in. But so the government is saying they have to go into effect, but they're all saying at the same time, this act doesn't require you to build anything. It just requires you to put zoning in place so that down the road we can address the housing crisis, which is another term that isn't defined, that isn't justified. They haven't, if you look at the court decision and some of the documents that were submitted, what's a housing crisis? What's an MBTA community? These are all unanswered questions. But the progressive Moonbat Supreme Judicial Court says, oh, it's okay. So they all admit that this is not even something that's going to result in any immediate action or impact to the so-called housing crisis, whatever it is. But that's an emergency. So how can it be an emergency if anything that would ever come out of this is, by their own statements or declarations, something that's not going to happen for possibly years from now? So how can it be an emergency to put something in place that's still being contended when this is not going to, this act, here it is right here, Section 3A, is not going to have any real impacts for years? So it can't be called an emergency. It can't be classified as an emergency to adopt these guidelines. They need to go through the public hearing process. In other words, you go up to the big auditorium at the State House and everybody has a chance to go to the microphone and say what they think about it. And on top of that, this could be repealed through a statewide initiative petition, and it could be appealed to a higher court. That's a little tricky at first to find grounds to do that, to say bring it into federal court, but it needs to be done. Now here's the other thing, talk about definitions, and I just want to throw this point in real quick before I forget, and then we'll go to our caller. When you look at the court's decision, and I brought this up at town meeting back on December 16th when I said, how are we in the MBTA district if we don't get any services from the MBTA, and any money we pay for public transportation goes to the GATRA organization? So we have the GATRA bus, right? We're not in the MBTA district. Were we at one time? Under state law, we apparently were. But did we vote to join the MBTA district back in the 60s? No. Did the town try to get out of it between then and now? Yes. So are we in it or are we out of it? That's a valid point to argue. Well, this question came to some resolution when I read on page 5 of the court decision, quote, Chapter 40A, which is this, where this Section 3A is found, defines an quote, MBTA community, unquote, to include the 14 cities and towns as defined in General Law, Chapter 161A, Section 1. Those 14 towns that they call the MBTA community, and the word MBTA community is used in the Section 3A law, and it's used all throughout the decision. MBTA community, MBTA community, MBTA community. Includes Milton, because Milton was one of the 14 original core MBTA communities. So that's the court's decision says an MBTA community is these 14 towns and cities, which does not include Marshfield, which does not include Tewksbury, which does not include Middleborough, which doesn't include Plymouth, all right? But everywhere they go, MBTA community, and people say, well, we're adjacent. Well, adjacent has no meaning under the law. That doesn't mean anything. It hasn't been resolved. This court decision stinks, all right? It's pitiful. And I'm not a legal scholar. I mean, I've had my share of involvement doing pro se work, but this is terrible. But it's very predictable, so it's not a disappointment to me. But the main thing, again, is that all the guidelines were not promulgated properly. Maura Healey is now trying to, like a tyrant, is trying to ram those down our throat without any public hearings or discussions. But those discussions and public hearings will have to occur because her emergency declaration will expire after 90 days. So you see, that's kind of where we are right now. And if you want, we can see what the local mainstream media, how they're covering it right now. And then we'll go to my call, okay?
It's been nearly a year since voters in Milton rejected a plan that would have complied with the state's new zoning law. Now, the state's highest court has upheld the MBTA Communities Act.
So we do see it as a victory.
However, the court also ruled that the state did not follow proper procedure in setting up the guidelines for how 177 communities served by the MBTA should redraw their zoning maps to allow for higher density housing. The court says until the state does that, the law is not enforceable.
And this may require additional time, but it does not in any way stand in the way of a municipality working to come into compliance, which is mandatory and made crystal clear by this decision today.
Governor Healy's office said new guidelines will be ready by the end of the week and effective immediately after that. But Milton resident Denny Swenson says she thinks coming up with new guidelines will take months.
And that's going to involve public hearings that are posted in the newspaper, etc. There's going to be many of them because it's a 177 town.
Well, there you go. It really is going to be a lengthy process, but in the meantime, we have to vote to repeal and appeal. So an effort will be started, I think, from what I'm hearing, to do a statewide initiative petition to repeal this. Meantime, hopefully we'll have attorneys on board. I know there are attorneys involved now, but I don't know what the arrangements are right now to keep them, to basically keep a roof over their heads while they battle for justice and liberty. One thing I want to take note of, Andrea Campbell says that it's basically, they're calling it a mandatory, right? They're saying it's mandatory. But they also say in the act that you have to vote, a town has to vote to adopt this. How can it be mandatory when you are allowed to vote? And Chapter 48, Section 5 also talks about the requirement to vote, that towns, the legislative bodies of towns and cities, they have the only right to adopt zoning. But then you're saying you have to adopt it. No, but there's a conflict there. And this court decision does not address, from what I can tell, the conflict with Section 5 of the same Chapter 40A. So you see, this is a complicated thing. They're anxious and eager to declare this a victory. That's totally understandable. No surprise. I'm not crying or heartbroken over that. That's totally predictable. They could have written their responses a year ago, and that would have been applicable. They have an already drafted statement ready to go. And this is the same Andrea Campbell that just moved. Where did she move? She just moved out to the exurbs somewhere, like, I don't know, Rehoboth or something. She moved some far out in the boonies, you know, so she doesn't have to put up with any of this stuff. Probably the community she moved to is not even an MBTA community. So that's my initial talk about what's going on with this. Let's go to a caller and see what is on his mind. Caller, what's up?
Joe, Steve Lynch, how are you?
Hey, Steve Lynch, how are you? How everybody out there here, Steve?
So what I see from just a, I haven't read into depth about these rulings, just from what people are saying. So this is a political decision by the SJC.
Absolutely.
And Maura Healey doesn't write laws. The legislature writes laws. She just signs them in, so that they're approved by her office, and then they become law. And the problem is here that because the SJC is politically motivated here, we need to take this to federal court. And I personally believe, because it's regulatory actions here, that the Chevron case would have some bearing on this.
Absolutely, yep.
And so, there's clear that if people don't know about the Chevron case, it's a case where the United States Supreme Court said that regulatory agencies don't have the right to make specific rulings because they don't know what the Congress actually meant when they made these laws, or the legislature of Massachusetts. So it has to be laid out specifically what can be done. And the reason they're throwing it down to us to vote at town meeting is because we're a legislative body, and now if we vote it in, we bypass that regulatory agency. It becomes a town bylaw.
Right, and that's exactly the strategy of the governor and her handlers, Andrea Campbell. That's exactly been their strategy, to scare the wits out of people, to see how many they could get to cave like that. Like the Selectboard Chair in Norwell went up to the microphone at Norwell Town Meeting a couple of weeks ago and said, I'm going to vote yes and recommend we vote yes because not enough towns are voting no. What an insane, twisted logic that is. if you're worried about the number of towns that are on board with resisting this, then you get your town on board too.
It's typical politics at its worst.
Right.
You know, and
No
so
spine.
we need to take this to a federal court, you know, to the first level of federal court, and get someone who understands the Chevron ruling and how regulatory agencies create rules that can or cannot be enforced, which I don't believe these can be enforced unless we would have passed them at our legislative body of town meeting.
And
so
that's why
we got to get on board with these other towns, get a good constitutional lawyer, and bring it to a federal court.
And that's why Marshfield is in good shape right now. Marshfield's in good shape. Middleborough's in good shape. Tewksbury, North Reading, Halifax, all these towns that voted no, which is like in Wilmington, there's like 31 towns that voted it down. There's only around 30 or 40 towns that have accepted it fully, is from what I can tell. So what does that leave? That leaves like over 100 towns that are like just holding off right now. And they're also in good shape. Not as good a shape as Marshfield, but they're also in good shape as long as they can hold the line and join us to fight this. And like you said, this needs to go to federal court. The only question I have is how do you get it into federal court? Do you need to link it to some federal issue or some federal expenditure to have the proper, standing? I don't know.
It's a straight up constitutional right. I mean, the Chevron case was decided. The Supreme Court ruled against the old Chevron case, which Chevron bought, you know, to the Supreme Court years ago because they didn't want the EPA telling them what to do, and they lost. But then it was overturned with, we'll call it the Trump Supreme Court. And now we have the Trump Supreme Court. So it could be just a violation of individual rights, of, you know, being overregulated by a regulatory agency and not by the legislature as you're supposed to be. So
yeah, one of the attorneys,
but, you know,
Michael,
that's what's over my head. It's just an idea. I think we need to get a good lawyer that understands how constitutional rights apply to this.
Steve, it's over your head, but didn't you hear Steve Darcy, our wonderful sage selectman, tell you that the vote at town meeting on December 16th was about legal strategy? I mean, he actually said that. He actually said that
Don't
vote.
get me going on this, Joe.
Well, I'm gonna play some clips. So if you're tuned in, you, Steve, and everybody else, we got some interesting clips coming up related to that. Yeah. So Steve, that's what Darcy was, and that's what a lot of critics of the vote no people were saying is that, oh, you don't understand. We hate the MBTA zoning too. But what we're here to vote on is the smart legal move. The smart legal move. Wait a minute.
Yep.
I thought the legislative body, the people, decide what they want, and then they direct the smart legal people to take on the battle and find a way to win.
Yeah, I guess that's the way it should be.
It's supposed to be. We're the people. This is government done for by the people. I mean, what is this? What is this?
I have to make a political prediction here, Joe.
Yeah.
I predict that the spring election for selectmen is going to be the most attended selectmen's election to have the most amount of votes in the history of this town.
Wow, and we've seen a few.
Yeah.
And the Eric Kelly's victory. Just think we've thrown out two incumbents in a row.
So
let's go for three.
It's up to the people in this town to make a decision to do something about how politics is being run in this town and our government. And besides this case, the fact is that municipal government has become unsustainable.
Absolutely.
The budgets are out of control. They just throw money away. It's outrageous. And somebody has to have the guts to step in and control these budgets.
And the municipal governments, especially like in Marshfield, are fully in line and on the same phase wavelength with the state government. There's like no difference. We might as well not even have a local government.
Yep, it just gets bigger and worse as you go up.
And it's been going on for a long time, and I want to put a name out there, Moresco. All right? What's the common thread through this entire period of time? Moresco. Now, and his handlers. All right? Let me stay tuned. Let me play a couple of clips.
Okay, I'm going to say goodnight on the phone, but I'm going to watch your show.
All right, thanks a lot. Good night.
So, see ya.
So, yeah, let's talk about the consistency of the disdain and disregard that Steve Darcy displayed against the voters at the last select board meeting on December 30th. This kind of goes back a ways, and Steve Darcy is a natural heir to the Moresco pro-establishment uni-party / Democrat Party ruling class, whatever you want to call it. He's a continuation. He's an inheritor of the tradition. Remember back, was it like 2007 and 2009? Do you remember when I got this recording from a select board meeting?
Or positive news out there. We're reliant on the media too much.
Let's sort of explore that communication piece. So communication.
The naysayers, they have all the local cable access shows because for some reason they have a lot of free time in their hands, so they're out spewing all their venom, working counterintuitively to what we're trying to do for the community. So we don't have
negative. You've got miscommunication, negative communication,
Or lack of communication.
lack of.
On our part.
Yeah, now, that was Patty Riley, Mike Moresco, Katie O'Donnell. Mike Moresco is now your town administrator. Patty Riley, I think, is working in the DA's office. And Katie O'Donnell is on the planning board, and she also works for the school system. But you see, that was their attitude about us way back then, 18 years ago. And you see Rocco Longo, rest his soul, sitting in the chair behind Mike Moresco on the left there with his glasses. He's doing one of these things. Because he's like, uh-oh, I don't want to be here, okay? Now, see, what happened was that selectmen hired a consultant affiliated with Suffolk University to discuss the town's pluses and minuses, the things we got going for us and what our challenges are going forward. And when earlier on in this discussion, I'll play the other clip right now, the consultant asked the select board and the town administrator, Mr. Longo, what do you think the pluses are in this town? And they said, we have a beach, we have a lot of varied living options, housing options, we have nice businesses, we have nice schools, all that kind of, the usual stuff. And the consultant asked the selectman, what are some of the negatives about your town? And here's what Patty Riley said.
Of these, but we have to put some up with the process. Weaknesses.
Conspiracy theorists.
Yeah.
Finding out more and more towns have them.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And we have a segment on a handful of folks that are, I don't know what the correct word is, but they work against everything we stand for.
So we would call them
Anti-government.
Anti-government naysayers.
an anti-government, and we can also call them interest groups because that's.
I think that I might phrase it too as frequently I feel that it may be a very vocal minority and a silent majority. I think the majority does come out, at the polls.
I give Katie O'Donnell credit for the way she parsed it out, okay? But as far as Moresco goes, he was just hell-bent to attack, okay? And he still is. And the reason why I say it is because when you look at the language of Steve Darcy in his recent tirade against the voters of Marshwood, who went through the trouble and the effort to go to town hall at night in the middle of the winter on the darkest, shortest day of the year to express their ideas, their opinion about this MBTA Communities Act, the dictatorial, the mandate-like nature that it has. And Darcy went on a tirade, which we'll play next, but you notice that also he backs up I've now learned he's tried to justify his tirade as being directed against a segment of the population. So he's trying to divide and conquer, and he's trying to make you think that there's a segment that this is not actually representative or reflective of the public, which it is. So let's look at Mr. Darcy's statement back from December 30th. December 30th meeting, if we can pull that up.
So I just wanted to address some of the behavior that we saw during the first night of town meeting, as well as some behavior that I've seen going on in our town for a long time that's been bothering me. So I'll start off by saying that the second night of town meeting I thought was great. It was very calm. There were people who got up to speak for and against each article that came up, and the debate was very respectful and very civil. However, a lot of the behavior the first night of town meeting I found to be an absolute embarrassment for our town. We had grown adults who were screaming at the top of their lungs to the point where additional town meeting attendees across the hall in the gymnasium could hear them. And there's absolutely no excuse for that kind of behavior. And I'd also like to point out, too, that we had scouts in attendance to earn their merit badge by watching town meeting, and they were infinitely better behaved and more professional than a lot of the adults who spoke that night. Now, do you think the scouts sitting there were inspired to get involved in the future for the town based on what they witnessed? I can't imagine that they were. And I think it's a sad state of our current affairs where if someone disagrees with you, it cannot be an honest difference of opinion, but the other person has to be evil or have malicious intentions. And essentially, on the MBTA article at town meeting, your vote was based on whether or not you thought we would win in court. That's it. Yet, for some reason, anyone who thought we would lose in court and was concerned about the town missing out on grant money, and we've already received 2 letters from the state for grants that we've lost, and people who are concerned that the state might pick a district that is significantly worse than the one proposed at town meeting, which was designed to minimize the impact, were maligned and attacked. There was not a single person who stood up at town meeting to say that they loved the state legislation that we had to tackle. Not a.
I would like to go on for the full almost 9 minutes of this diatribe. It was talk about disgraceful, but I'll make a couple of quick points. He says that grown adults were screaming. Why were they screaming? Yes, they were raising their voice. Why were they screaming? Because the moderator kept trying to shut them down and deprive them of their free speech rights in their lousy 2 minutes. If I wanted to get up the microphone and sing Yankee Doodle Dandy for 2 minutes, I should be allowed to do that. I wish I could. I didn't have time to find it today, but I have a tape of Mike Maresco attending what was then called the Town Meeting Review Committee, put together by Jim Robinson, former moderator, okay, who was no charmer himself, although he tried to be. When Maresco went to the meeting of the TMRC, which included people like Bob Parkus, Madeline McDonald, Reed Stewart, rest her soul, and stated that at their most recent town meeting, Maresco claimed that a person who we don't have to name, because we all know who I'm talking about, got up at town meeting 26 times, and nothing he said was germane to the discussion or the articles or the motion on the floor. That would be me. Michael Maresco counted the number of times that I got up at, it was like the 205 or 6 town meeting, when the voters, the citizens, the residents had victories. There were mandates and big plans that were being foisted onto the town, and the voters said, we're not comfortable with this. So we defeated them. But Maresco counted the number of times that I got up to the microphone. It's 26 times. And I don't even know if that's true. But I do know a lot of people came up to me and whispered in my ear and said, Joe, I'm afraid to go to the microphone, and I don't really know what I'm doing. Would you ask this question for me? That kind of stuff. So what if I got up 50 times? So what? And who is he to declare what's germane and what's not germane? So that's where that comes from. The other point, so the people that were getting up at the microphone were being shouted down by the moderator and being threatened and actually had the microphone turned off on them. So why wouldn't they raise their voices? That's all that was going on. And he talks about the scouts. You think the scouts should probably attend some more select board meetings, Mr. Darcy, and to see what a tyrant you are and how you call out people on a personal level like you did to me back in May last year. They should watch my impeachment from August last year. You think the Scouts would be outraged at that behavior being displayed against another elected official and fellow citizen? Do you think that they would be outraged by you trying to bring up details of my personal life and financial situation, totally unrelated to the matter at hand? You think they would be outraged at that? You think they would be surprised to see someone like Lynn Fiddler run away every time somebody challenges her, like she did when she was on the ZBA and now as she's on the select board? You think that Scouts could be shown and have it explained to them how you and Mike Maresco and Lynn Fiddler and other people always appear to be in in collusion? How it's always kind of mysterious? I think we could maybe we should teach our Scouts and our students in Marshfield some more civics lessons, and by example, show how the citizens are treated and how the citizens have information withheld from them. And then again, Steve Darcy says that the vote, he proclaims that the vote at town meeting on December 16th was about the people having to guess, basically, whether or not adopting this law was the better strategy. That's what it was about? I thought we were the legislative body. I thought we had free speech rights. We were free to express our opinion based on our own reading and our own evaluation of that. So you're now going to tell us why we're supposed to vote a certain way and how we're supposed to vote? And why we have to only consider what you consider to be the issues? Really? Are you kidding me? Darcy needs to be recalled now. I don't know if people want to put in the time, but he needs to be gone right now. So anyway, there was another interesting thing that happened at the select board meeting, and that has to do with another topic I want to touch upon in the time we have. That is the new school, the new vocational school, which I talked about earlier. You're going to have to go to the polls January 25th and vote yes or no. Do you want Marshfield residents to take on part of the 276 minus 111? What is that number again? 111,561, $166 million, which is going to be split up among 9 towns. Marshfield is going to be paying somewhere around 16% of the 165 plus interest. And when you add it to the assessment that we're going to be carrying for the number of students that will be enrolled or projected to be enrolled, here's another point. Nobody's really given us an accurate projection of the current, near future, and long-term numbers of students that would be going to the school, except to say they claim to be holding 40 seats for Marshfield children to go to the vocational technical school. Nobody's given it. They say there's 3 in there now. Are there? How many will there be next year? I don't know. How many have applied? We don't know. So we don't really know what the actual assessment is going to be for the number of students. What we do know is we'd be on the hook for something on over $3 million a year if we have something like the projected number of potential students and the override for the new building. So you need to vote on the override for the new building. Now, Eric Kelly has put a lot of time and expressed a lot of interest in what the costs are going to be to the taxpayers. What a novel idea, an elected official thinking about the cost to the taxpayers of government programs. What a novel idea. Geez, don't you think we should elect more people like that? Like the caller just said? Don't you think we should elect more people that are sort of representative and reflect the thoughts and concerns of the taxpayers? Wouldn't that be a novel idea, instead of whoever the most popular person is, or whoever's got the most connections, or whoever's got the biggest machine behind them? So I hope, like the caller said, that the elections this coming spring for select board have the biggest turnout ever. And you're not going to be there to say, who's going to make the best legal decision? And no, it's going to be, who do you think reflects your sentiment, your will, your opinions about the issues? What you envision for the town, what you want, your definition of affordability is. That's who you have to vote for, not the same old people. Well, actually, I think he's got a bachelor's degree and he's got a master's degree, and this kind of like Ouija board stuff, Or I like his name better than the name of this person. No, talk to these people that are running. And I thought when I ran, I was just representing the basic concerns and needs of the taxpayers and the residents. They wanted a clean, preserved environment. They didn't want to be Brockton by the sea. These are all the things I wanted to encourage business. I wanted to encourage use of the Horticultural Society fairgrounds as a way to bring more tax revenue into town. There was a whole range of things that, from talking to people, I knew reflected what people wanted to see. They wanted to see a safe, clean environment, for one thing. They didn't want to see high-density housing. They didn't want to see more traffic. They didn't want to see 6 lanes going down to the water. So yeah, you've got to vote. You've got to vote, and you've got to vote for someone who is one of the people. So anyway, where was I? I'm going back to the discussion. So what happened at the discussion was that the representatives from the Vocational Technical High School came to the select board meeting, and they were going to have a discussion about supposedly the upcoming vote related to the new school construction. And if you notice, what happens after the discussion, during the course of the discussion? Lynn Fiddler, the chair, has really no questions of the superintendent, the vocational technical schools district superintendent, and a guy named Joe Zambello, who apparently has some connection to Moresco that goes back some time. So those two guys sat in front of the select board. Lynn Fiddler had really no questions for them. Steve Darcy really had no questions. He usually just recites some platitudes. That's all he's capable of doing, sound bites and platitudes. Then Lynn Fiddler says to Eric, you got any questions? Now, we don't have the clip here, but if you watch that recording, take a close look at when she says that, what does she and Darcy do? They both look at Moresco, and they go, like they knew what was about to happen. They knew Eric is a stand-up guy, and he wants answers, to his questions in public. He doesn't want to go meet with you behind closed doors or have a cup of coffee somewhere. He's on a fact-finding mission, and he wants you with him. And he wants you to hear firsthand the answers to his questions. This is how government should work. So Eric Kelly now tries to get into questioning, getting answers to his questions about this override, about this new school, about how they arrived at the new school design decision. And watch what happens in this first clip.
Okay, so I'd like to move along from this presentation and allow Eric to reach out to you, and if we need to have another meeting, then we'll add that to the agenda.
Certainly. I will have to say that I do not agree with that, but as the chair, if you want to cut me off from asking any more questions, something, I guess that's your right, if that's the way you want to.
Well, I'd like you to ask your questions. However, I'd like to make sure that we all have an opportunity to ask questions.
I'm not stopping you if you guys are asking any more questions.
Well, I will ask more questions at a later date.
Well, all right, you can ask them at a later date.
Okay,
We're here right
so
now.
we're going to move forward out of this presentation, and we will give our select board member another opportunity to reach out. It's currently 7:43.
Let's get
Thank you.
it again.
I'd like to take a 5-minute recess. Do I have a second?
Second. Motion been made and duly seconded. Roll call is in order. Ms. Fiddler?
Aye.
Mr. Darcy?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
No.
Okay, 2-1 for a vote, for a break.
So we will take a 5-minute recess. The time is 7:43.
So you notice See, Lynn Fiddler's concerned about the time. She says, oh my goodness, it's already 7:33. And watch Mike Maresco and Joe Zambello. Watch him. He shakes his hands of the superintendent. There's Joe. Joe, hey buddy, good to see you. Good job. There you go. Oh, thank you, Mr. Darcy. Look at Mr. Darcy. He's so enraptured. Look at that big smile right there. Oh boy. And Lynn Fiddler's concerned about the time, but yet she has no problem with giving Darcy like 9 minutes to go on his tirade, on his condemnation of the voters. And Lynn Fiddler can't handle then she says, oh, Eric, you can reach out on your own time. But that's not the point. It's what I just said. Eric wants to ask the questions, and he wants you to be there with him to hear what the answers to his questions are.
Oh dear. Oh dear. Where am I smelling salts? I think I shall faint. Don't you dare think, Pat Hamilton.
And this is how Lynn Fiddler has been like when she was on the ZBA. There were times that she had to turn the meeting over to Bob Galvin, her buddy. And even now as a select board member, many times you see how she just takes shortcuts and then complains about the time of day, the time of night, and ends up treating a truth seeker like Eric like he's nothing. He's an elected official. He's one of 3 select board members in the town of Marshfield. He's there representing, trying hard to represent and get you, the taxpayer, the answers that he has discerned through. He talks, I know he talks to people all the time. I talked to Eric once. I said, well, hey, Eric, what'd you do today? I said, what? It's like he talks to like dozens of people. And he gets feedback from people because he's an approachable person. He's out there. Now, Mr. Zambello has got a problem with Eric. So what does he do? Goes up to him, gives him all kinds of crap. And in fact, from what I heard, notice the sound was turned off. And this part of the meeting, this clip was cut out and was not broadcast to the public to see Zambello basically accosting Eric Kelly here, or appearing to, with the finger pointing and the arm waving and the gesturing and the forceful talking, obvious forceful speech, and Eric trying to defend himself, and Steve Darcy just standing there beside Zambello. Look at that. You know, look, it goes on and on and on. You think that's appropriate for that Mr. Zambello to be having that intense interaction with a select board member off the record like that? Doesn't sound right to me. And in fact, one thing that was relayed to me was that Mr. Zambello said that he was going to run against Eric Kelly when Eric Kelly is up for re-election. So Mr. Zambello, who's been in town, from what I hear, for maybe 6 or 7 years, is already ready to step into the position as a select board member. So he's got ambitions. And when Eric Kelly asked Mr. Zambello was appointed to his position as this sort of liaison type position, Eric asked Mr. Zambello, how'd you find out about this? And the response, from what I remember, if I remember correctly, if memory serves, his response was, oh, Mike told me. Mike told me about it. Look at that, look at this. Look at the finger pointing. Look at that, boom, 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 and then banging on the desk there. Look at that, and a send-off, a final send-off. And I'm not done yet, I've got another one for you. Boom, boom, boom. And look at this, Steve Darcy does nothing, keeps his hands crossed, right? Does nothing. Doesn't say, hey, take it easy, we'll catch up with this later. If we could have a lip reader here. Look at him going at Eric. Isn't that unbelievable? And that's what you were not shown. That was excised. And I can understand why you could say it's not relevant, there's no sound, you know, that kind of stuff. But for whatever the reason, which may be justifiable, understandable, a correct editorial decision, I understand all that. But it's what you didn't see, and now you've seen it. So Christine Hill, who's been on our show, did a little coverage on this issue, on this meeting. And she looked up Steve Darcy's LinkedIn page And she found him advertising himself as a relationship management expert who draws from understanding of corporate organizations in conjunction with extensive history, successfully steering community causes. The grammar is very poor, which makes me wonder who wrote the diatribe statement that he came up with, all right? Now, we have another clip I'm trying to squeeze in. It's Mr. Maresco talking about his financial team with Superintendent Hickey. It's very short.
And, you know, for Marshfield, how we would do it, and I mentioned earlier in our program, was we would do a debt exclusion to cover our portion of that, and we would have to decide, you know, talking with my financial team, if that's something we do every year, if that's something we do every 4 years, we'll have to look at the mechanics on what's gonna work best for us.
Yes.
We'll have to look at the mechanics. Can someone explain to me what that means? And you know, this goes to the issue. To tie it all together with the Supreme Judicial Court decision, to tie it all together with the behavior at the town meeting, to tie it all together with this school override, this potential override with the big bill that we're going to incur for the new building and for the assessment for the students we're going to be sending to this vocational technical school. To tie it all together, it's financial impact to the taxpayers. You see, there's at least, that's one common thread among all these things. When people like Muriel and Tina and other people that you might remember first names from that got up at the microphone that Steve Darcy complained about were screaming because they were being shut down, what were they trying to get? And Jackie Mason. People like Jackie Mason, all these people that I pray get into town government, along with John Cusick, run for selectman or something like that. They're all asking what is going to happen to the taxpayers and the residents. This is one of the common threads I'm trying to get out here tonight. What's going to happen to us? When you say our real estate taxes go up, there's no names and faces and families attached to that kind of expression. But there are, because it's the individuals and their families and the children that suffer every time you jack their taxes up. When you play games with state allocations, when you play games with free cash. There's one of the common threads. Anyway, so I'm just about done here. That's as much as I can cram in here. But if you do, again, if you're computer literate and you want to find out more about what Christine Hill had to say about Steve Darcy, go to her Substack. I think it's called Duxbury Substack. Christine Hill, ChristineHill. And she described Steve Darcy's behavior as sounding like a quote, sounding like a cartoon character, a pompous vice principal with a nasally voice. Steve Darcy spent 8 minutes and 50 seconds on his tirade. You don't have to have these people on the select board. You can have people like Johnny Cusick. You can have another Eric Kelly. These are the kinds of people you can have on your select board. All you have to do is take 10 minutes to make it happen when you go to the polls. I'm Joe Pasevich for Control Room. That's going to do it for me. I hope I got enough in there to help to bring you up to speed. When you see me on the street, say hi, okay? Next week we'll be taping a program in advance, all right? But until then, try to stay warm and out of the wind. For Control Room, again, I'm Joe Pasevich. Thanks for the help.